So, South Africa now knows the executive of the 7th administration following that late night announcement by President Cyril Ramaphosa. After weeks of negotiations, it was the longest it had taken for the newly sworn-in president to announce his cabinet, 11 days since his inauguration on the 19th of June. Political analyst, associate professor at the Tshwane University of Technology, Mukonza joins me now. Prof. Mukonza, good morning. So, it took this long, the president said, to ensure the stability of the cabinet. And as a result of those nuptials, we now have a co-governing unit that has something old, something new, and something blue. Is it a good cabinet?
Good morning, Iman. Good morning to your viewers. A bit of surprises. In there, we had some continuity also with the Minister of Finance and the Minister of Finance. I think people were watching that very closely, and that continuity, I think, bodes very well, particularly for the economy, for stability. Yes, surprises, quite a number of them. Obviously, we knew because the cabinet this time around was going to be made up of opposition political players. We expected new faces, but equally new faces from the African National Congress. So yes, a bit of the odd and a bit of the new.
Let's bring political analyst and associate professor at the Tshwane University of Technology, Professor Mukonza, back into our conversation. Ricky, thanks very much. You started by talking to us and sharing that analysis of this new cabinet and its composition. You heard there the first media statement, really, from the DA following the announcement of those cabinet positions yesterday. And the DA basically saying that if you look across the spread of their ministers and their deputy ministers, they are represented now in virtually every cluster in Parliament. The DA's voters' voice will be heard in every room in these institutions. Your thoughts on the DA and how, now that the story, insofar as the composition of this government is concluded, has stood up against their election campaign and the journey that brought them to this point now?
I think the DA did generally well, both in terms of if you look at the electoral outcome, they didn't lose much. Equally, they didn't make a lot of progress. So I think they showed stability in how they are growing electorally. In terms of the negotiations, I think 6 cabinet posts is no mean achievement, and quite a number of deputy ministers. They did quite well. And as the leader of the party said, they strove to get a seat in each and every cluster in the cabinet. And for me, it shows that they were strategic in how they pushed for positions. So let's see how it goes, and how the ministers fare in the new cabinet, because obviously South Africans are going to be watching closely on how these ministers perform, and this will either be their route to growth, or it will cause them to diminish in terms of their numbers in the next election.
It's a really exciting moment, but we now have 32 ministries, 43 deputy ministers, far larger than that of countries like Germany at 17, Japan 20, the UK 24, and the US 26. So these countries have larger populations than we do. They have much bigger economies. South Africa is at $380 billion compared to the US, 27 trillion. The UK, which is comparable in size to us at 67 million people, has an economy of $2.8 trillion. Does size matter for us? And, and we'll come back to the criticisms around, parties and joining, especially the opposition benches who had criticized the big bloated cabinet and wanted that to be edited down, now being an active part of those cabinets, in fact, an expanded cabinet. But do we need, again, a cabinet of this size with an economy like ours and a population like we do have?
Iman, under ideal conditions, we definitely need a smaller cabinet. But obviously, putting myself in the shoes of the president, it wasn't an easy task that he had at his hand. And I want to remind viewers that context matters. You remove context, you may get your interpretation and analysis wrong. The president had to deal with dynamics that had to do with the parties that needed to be accommodated in the GNU. He also had to deal, and this is quite important, Iman, with internal political dynamics in both the African National Congress and in the tripartite. And I think for him to accommodate everyone in a manner that would not cause, more bickering than what we saw in the past weeks, he had to do what he did, that is enlarging the cabinet. You would recall, Iman, that the president had promised previously that he would want to rationalize the cabinet and also that is also reducing the number of cabinet posts. But obviously, the reality that he faced post the elections, given that the ANC did not get the needed 50% plus one votes to make to go it alone in forming the next government. I think the president was in a difficult position that we all need to understand.
Yeah, and I think what you would say is that the country then needs to appreciate some of the trade-offs then that had to have been made. Let's stay with this theme. What do you divine from those cabinet appointments now about the power and the influence of the president and the ANC? They've managed to hang on to the deputy president, minister in the presidency, and so on. Those were asks from the other political parties, the DA specifically.
I think they also did well because, I mean, the cabinet is still predominantly ANC. Of course, the nature of the outcome of the election meant that the power and influence of the president and the African National Congress had been reduced. But equally, if you look at the announcements yesterday, they got the deputy president. They still control the pace. They got some key ministry. The International Relations and Cooperation Ministry is quite an influential ministry. They still have control of government, but equally they lost, for me, a key cabinet position, given that we are in the fourth industrial revolution. The communications and digital portfolio, for me, that was a big loss. Equally, they lost the COCTA portfolio. For me, that's equally a critical portfolio, given the fact that it plays a coordinating role across all the spheres of government. So you would say, well, they may have hung on to some of the key positions, but equally there are positions that they lost, and inevitably it had to be that way.
And you talked about that particular portfolio, the COCTA portfolio, now being occupied by the IFP leader, Belenkosini Hlabisa. Let's look at some of the first-timers. So you've got DA's John Steenhuisen, Agriculture. You've got Land Reform and Rural Development. Going to the IFP, you've got Belenkosini Hlabisa at COCTA, all the way to the FF Plus, Dr. Peter Groenewald. These parties are all at odds with each other. We'll talk about the political polarity in just a moment, but let's start with the question of whether you think they are fit for purpose.
I think the choices generally, although we have novices, those that are coming in for the first time. But equally, we have quite a number of choices that I think will be up to the task. But Iman, I also want to bring in an important point. We must understand why the president and the African National Congress opted for the government of national unity. And Nicole Machiavelli tells us that the ends, for politicians, the end justifies the means. And I would argue that the president, I don't think, cared much about the appointments from the other parties. He simply wanted to ensure that he has a government of national unity where he neutralizes, the influence of some of these key political parties like the Democratic Alliance. And let's see how it goes. Exciting times ahead.
Yeah, quoting quoting Machiavelli there. I think on many in many instances you can see reflections, between the concept of political maneuvering and playing and certainly trying to see the long game. Let's go back to the political polarity and how parties should manage that in the House, especially given, their commitment to this intention of doing everything, not for along their party lines, although naturally that there will be, that perspective in how they approach things or the issues that they go after based on their political and voter base. But by and large, with this intention to, ideologically achieve and practically achieve a government of national unity, how do they negotiate and manage their political polarities?
I think it's not going to be easy, given particularly the different positions that the major parties, the African National Congress and the Democratic Alliance, occupy. I think it's not something that I think there's going to be bickering, but obviously it has to be managed because both sides have a lot to lose if the GNU collapses. The DA leader was very clear that part of what they wanted was to, what he calls saving South Africa. And my interpretation of that is that he wanted talk costs to ensure that there's not going to be an alliance between the ANC, EFF, and the MK. So I think they will. If this GNU collapses, they have something to lose. Obviously, the African National Congress is the party that is leading this government of national unity. They would want a success of it. And at the end of it, towards as they move to campaign for the coming election, they will, tell South Africans that we were able to manage a difficult situation for the country and we were able to take the country forward. But you are right, there will certainly be bottlenecks because of the different policy positions of the different parties that are involved. But I'm sure there is a mechanism that is there outside of the cabinet to iron out policy contradictions and policy, disagreements that may arise along the way. How that will be implemented is what we are all awaiting to see.